Welcome to the Agroecology Food System Transformation from Field to Fork virtual seminar. I'm Karen Hansen-Kuhn. I'm Program Director at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. We have a really exciting list of speakers today. I want to start with a few housekeeping notes on how things will work. Before we begin, look at the Zoom webinar control panel hovering near the bottom. You can ask questions of the presenters at any time through the presentation by typing your questions in the Q&A box located on the panel and then selecting the send button. We'll get to as many questions as we can, so please send your questions as they come into you. You can find the interpretation button in the webinar control panel as well. It'll look like a little globe at the bottom. We have French and Spanish translators on the webinar, so feel free to select the appropriate language. Did the interpreters want to add something here? Okay, maybe not. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on IATP's website after the fact. We'll send links to all of the attendants and registrants. So we're going to start with a poll. Colleen, can you launch that? So we'd like to see where people are joining from and what your relationship is to agroecology. So we're launching this poll to share as we get started. So to get us started, the dominant food system is exploitative and extractive, but examples from around the world demonstrate that a more just and fair food system is possible. Agroecological approaches have evolved to offer a set of guiding principles that can help transform our food systems to create more socially just, diverse, holistic, and sustainable food systems that better respect and benefit cultures, the environment, and people engaged at every level. Agroecological approaches are anchored in human rights, rooted in culturally and ecologically diverse knowledge systems, and have the potential to build the community resilience necessary to deal with both the forces of climate change and corporate control. Yet there have been roadblocks to advancing agroecology globally, and I will speak more slowly. This virtual seminar is sponsored by the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy and the Coopération Internationale pour le Développement et la Solidarité, CIDSE. IATP is an NGO working at the intersection of policy and practice to ensure fair and sustainable food, farm, and trade systems. We're rooted in research and coalition work, advocating for policy in the public interest at the state, federal, and international levels. CIDSE is an international family of Catholic social justice organizations working for transformational change to end poverty and inequalities, challenge systemic injustice, inequity, destruction of nature, and promote just and environmentally sustainable alternatives. CIDSE brings together 18 member organizations from Europe and North America, and its international secretariat is based in Brussels. So now I think Colleen will be sharing the results of the poll. Can you post that? There you go. So we have people from really all over the world. So let's get started. So our first presenter today is Sophia Murphy, Executive Director of IATP. She's based in the United States. Sophia is a food systems and international economy expert with 30 years of professional experience, including as board chair, program director, and published writer. A policy expert and advocate who is focused on resilient food systems, agriculture, and international trade, Sophia has worked primarily with civil society organizations, as well as with government, intergovernmental organizations, and universities. Sophia, can you start us off? Sophia, you might turn. Yeah,
I had to get permission to open up my camera. It's a big event for us. It's really exciting to be here and to welcome everyone. IATP is so excited to cooperate and collaborate with CIDSE and to bring all of you together for this in-depth look at what agroecology means to us all. So I wanted to start, well, for us, agroecology is about bringing people together, being able to determine what food we grow, how we grow it, how we get paid for it, what we eat, and how we access the food that we eat. It's about a whole food system, in other words, and understanding the connections and the relationships that are built into the food system. So for IATP, the entry point really is, has always been about that question of food distribution and the relationships among communities, both how to exchange knowledge in producing food, but also exchanging the food itself and exchanging food practices. So that it's not really a single method or a kind of list of instructions that defines agroecology, but really a kind of philosophy and an approach to how we think about food as a whole. I first heard about agroecology probably 20 years ago or so when I was first working at IATP in an earlier iteration. And it was the work of Miguel Altieri that I read. And the insight I took away from the first lesson in agroecology was the idea that you see the food potential in a whole landscape rather than the yield in an individual plant. And I think we'll be coming back to that a lot throughout the day, this idea of understanding an interconnected place, as opposed to focusing on a specific technology or plant or technique. And it was about 20 years ago as well that I first met the farmers who were organized as Masipag, an organization based in the Philippines that was working with farmers to improve their livelihoods by reducing their dependence on external inputs and reducing their environmental footprint at the same time. And the example that the organizers from Masipag gave me was to talk about the traditional flooded rice paddies in which farmers often would keep fish in order to feed the household. And that with the advent of Green Revolution seeds and hybrids, that fish cultivation became impossible because the water was poisoned and would no longer sustain life. So that in order to increase the rice yield, you'd actually lost the source of protein. That was an important part of the nutrition for the households and farm families in that community. And I think that that's another example for me that exemplifies what agroecology is about, how to do more with what you have by thinking about it as a whole. And all those years ago at IATP, we were involved in a series of projects that we didn't call agroecology, but that I think you could see where agroecology was influencing the thinking and the understanding, whether they were arguments with the US Army Corps of Engineers about how to manage floodplains, or arguments with the chemical companies that their use of genetically modified seeds was going to generate a generation of superbugs and superweeds that in the long run were going to undermine the very production that they were supposed to be enhancing, or arguments about the control of fertilizer use and the damage that excess fertilizer was doing to the water system and to industries downstream, where marine populations were being choked to death effectively by the effects of nitrous oxide, excess nitrogen in the water. But for me, I think the example that best exemplifies what agroecology is about with IATP is Peace Coffee and the fair trade company that we set up out of going to Mexico, first to Chiapas, and meeting with farmers' organizations there to talk about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we were interested to think about cross-border experiences and what trade policy was doing to the domestic agriculture policies that governments were implementing. But the farmers pushed back and wanted instead to be talking about markets and about price instability and about their lack of bargaining power with the coffee buyers that they were selling to. And out of that experience, Peace Coffee was born, a for-profit serving a non-profit, which is initially IATP. Peace Coffee is now an independent company, and a fair trade model that was rooted in these issues that were determined by the farming communities that we wanted to collaborate with. And there's a lot of elements to that story. The fair trade story is important, the connection of the producers and the consumers, the understanding that food systems can be both large and small and still connected, but also taking the lead from the farmers growing the coffee, who had their agenda, were clear what they wanted from the relationship. So I think that in those 20 years, there's a lot that's happened. I think switching gears to think about where we are now and wanting to recognize first a lot of the work that's gone in at the multilateral level to define agroecology for us as a global community, and then leaving the space for the local definition and ownership of what agroecology is all about. We're involved at the moment in a bit of a national struggle with the US government setting up an alliance of what it calls, sustainable production, which is trying to promote a lot of the technologies that agroecology has emerged to resist, insisting on pesticide use, fertilizer, inorganic fertilizers, hybrid seeds, genetic engineering. And in marshalling the arguments about why that's a problem, and in thinking about the arguments that we've had at the multilateral system, trying to get governments to adopt principles of agroecology so that we can ground what we think agroecology is in an agreed approach. I think that we've moved the whole discussion to a new level and to an important place where we're able to take strength from what we share internationally and at the same time give meaning to agroecology where we are. And I think for me, COVID has been a really important lesson for us all, for what's wrong in the food system, much of which we would have been saying and pointing to for a long time, but also for some of the opportunities perhaps that as a movement we can build on and exploit. I hope that we'll hear more about some of that today. I think that the COVID challenge was in some ways an unexpected thing, because it was a food insecurity challenge that didn't start with a lack of food. There was plenty of food in the supply, but we saw the ways in which the food system was inappropriate and maladapted to deal with the shock. And so we had a lot of food and then an extraordinary amount of waste. And that was especially true in North America, where half or more of the food that we produce is geared for food that's consumed outside of the home. So once we were consumed to our homes, we had to redefine what it meant to have food and to have enough. And we saw there was enormous waste from things like the potatoes that were destined to become French fries, or the chicken that was designed to become chicken nuggets. Those foods were no longer being consumed, and there was no place for them to go. And that other kinds of food and manageable quantities like flour or yeast in order to make bread, those were hard to come by. And I think that it was a lesson both in resilience and in redundancy. And a focus for a lot of us working and thinking about agroecology is on medium and long-term outcomes. We're trying to flatten, at least, the trajectory of climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to protect biodiversity and species survival. But COVID forced attention on some very immediate problems in our food system that are very important to agroecology as well. Most especially the vulnerability of workers in the food system, their lack of rights, their lack of basic worker rights, their lack of human rights, and the price that they paid in their lives in exposure to the disease, and the exposure of the kind of living conditions that they have was a really important part, I think, of understanding where the food system is vulnerable, and where thinking about agroecology principles would lead you to a very different outcome. I think we also saw how the efficiencies lauded by the market model that we have in place generates enormous inefficiency and waste when there's a lack of ability to respond and react. And so I think that, and the third thing I want to say is that we saw what we can do for food security and for household well-being by putting a guaranteed income in people's hands. and by breaking the dominance of industrial food systems, forcing open spaces that a lot of the local food systems were able to respond to when the larger concentrated system started to break down. And that we saw how that could generate less waste overall in the end. And I think we see possibilities to redefine efficiency, because we want to have an efficient food system, but we have to imagine what that would mean. I think that the principle from the high-level panel of experts, the HLPE acronym that we're going to hear a lot today, I suspect, they had a principle called synergy. And I really think that that word is a powerful word for what we're getting at, that synergy doesn't mean doing away with all excess, but it means, I think, a certain adaptive capacity to respond to the situation that we're in. I think that I would maybe emphasize two other principles in closing that for IATP are crucial. The first is democracy, and back to that fair trade conversation and what it meant for us to go to Chiapas, to be listening to farmers' organizations there and bringing that together with the work we were doing with farmers' organizations in the United States. How do we engage with local voices and give local communities expression? And how do we create a dialogue among the local decision-making structures so that communities are able to work together and work out some harmony with what they are, so that IATP is really interested in that level of democracy that agroecology promotes, that looks over the border, if you like, and outside of the community into those who are connected to us through the ecosystem and through the food that we share. So democracy is really important to us, and health, the overall system, ecosystem health, and the health of those that are eating in it. So welcome everyone again, and thank you for this chance to be with you today.
Thank you, Sophia. So unfortunately, our next speaker, Michelle Pambert, who was supposed to join us today, had a last-minute issue and was not able to join us. But very fortunately, Magdalena Ackerman has kindly agreed to join us and give a presentation on the depth of agroecology, how it's anchored in rights-based approaches. Magdalena is from Argentina and is with the Society for International Development and is based in Rome. She's part of the coordination committee of the civil society mechanism of the Committee on World Food Security on behalf of the NGO constituency. She is a member of the co-facilitation team of several CSM working groups and a key member for the working group on agroecology. Also, I would really like to encourage people to enter your questions in the Q&A section. But Magdalena, can we hear from you now?
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to this event. And yeah, I don't think I will be able to transmit the wisdom of Michelle Pambert, but I hope I can at least give an insight on agroecology, and maybe particularly speaking from a youth's perspective, and particularly in the crisis we are now facing, the climatic and environmental crisis we are facing, and how agroecology and particularly for the youth is providing a response to adapt to climate change and to reverse it as well, and also to regain our roots to our territories. So I hope through my short presentation, I will be able to transmit some of these messages. And I think Sophia's presentation earlier was really wonderful in providing some examples. And she clearly illustrated how agroecology is not only meant to apply ecological principles to agricultural practices to address climate change or biodiversity loss. Agroecology goes much beyond these agricultural practices, because agroecology aims a systemic transformation of food systems. And for such a systemic transformation that is so urgently needed, the transformation emerges and needs to emerge from the role and the agency of food producers and consumers themselves. So the centrality actually of the role and agency of food producers as well as consumers makes that agroecology is not only a practice. Sophia also said this. Agroecology is also a movement. Agroecology is a science, and agroecology is knowledge and culture. And actually, food producers themselves are the holders of such knowledge and the culture embedded in agroecology. Through agroecology, food producers regain control and autonomy over their food production. They are able to decide the what, the how, the when to produce food and how to consume it and how to produce it. But all of this is also goes through social equity and in full respect of our planet. And this is the pillar of agroecology, the respect of the common home that hosts us every day. So having this in consideration, and actually to achieve the agroecological systems, agroecology at its core has a social organization and structure that implies actually a power shift from corporations to food producers, to those who actually produce the food. And this power shift that is embedded in agroecology, it also aims to build socioeconomic resilience of communities that have historically produced food, and also maybe food producers that might want to come back to the rural territories and start producing food again. But understanding this power shift and the social organization and structure that agroecology implies, there are also several let's say requirements or implications that need to be in place for food systems to be disinvolved through agroecology. These implications are first and foremost access and control over resources. They are fundamental for the communities that are producing food through agroecology. Also, as I said before, food producers themselves are the holders of knowledge. And so recognizing that they are the holders of knowledge, this means that food producers organizations and communities that have historically produced food become actually the main vehicle to transmit, to disseminate, and to uptake agroecology. And so once we understand that that this knowledge must be transmitted through food producers themselves, then automatically we end up rethinking methodologies on how to transmit the knowledge, how to disseminate it. And this means that the methodologies for disseminating agroecological knowledge needs to be horizontal. And one one good example of such methodologies are, for instance, the farmers to farmers schools. Also, another implication of agroecological transformation of food systems is that communities regain autonomy and independence of their food systems, and they become independent from the corporate or industrial dominant food systems. And this is done through several ways. One of them, one important one is the elimination of reliance on agrochemicals, because not depending on agrotoxics, on agrochemicals, producers regain the autonomy over their production, while protecting their health, the health of the communities that are surrounding the food production, and also protecting the health of the environment. Also, in terms of autonomy, it's important to highlight the feminist perspective as well, no? Agroecology has provided powerful pathways to overcome oppressive structures that are often embedded in the dominant industrial food systems. Agroecology struggles and reshifts from these oppressive structures. For instance, peasant women in a lot of the regions of the world have a long tradition of plant breeding and adapting local seeds varieties to changing environments, and acknowledging that they have the knowledge, they have the tradition, they have the know-how on how to adapt the seeds, then automatically women regain their agency and their autonomy. There is a very interesting paper on feminism and agroecology, which I might share on the chat later. And this really gives a profound understanding on the links between feminism and agroecology, and how without feminism, there's no agroecology. So this is also a key aspect of agroecology. Last, in terms of autonomy, is and I think Sophia was also giving this in great detail, was the autonomy from global markets, no? Because agroecology, the preferred ways of distributing, selling, or exchanging food, the preferred ways are through short circuits, and such as local markets, or for instance, community-supported agriculture, that actually create a direct link between producers and consumers themselves. Through all of this, and considering the ecological principles of agroecology, agroecology is pivotal also for a better nutrition, and so better health and better environment for communities. And so concluding now, maybe the concluding message, but which is also the basis, no, is that all of these implications that I have been mentioning are actually embedded in the struggle to fulfill, to protect, and to respect human rights. I was talking about women's rights. I was talking about the right to adequate food, the right to land, the rights of peasants and other people working and living in rural areas, right to health, right to a healthy environment as well, and so on. Because actually, as it was mentioned in the beginning, agroecology is anchored on the human rights framework. And so agroecology and the fulfillment of the human rights framework in all its indivisibility become then the pillar for food sovereignty that we so urgently need. So thank you so much.
I'm kind of liking this video function. People know it's time to close up. Thank you so much for that, and also for doing it with such short notice. So we're going to have another poll. This one, we're going to ask people to finish the sentence, agroecology is, and then we will share the results shortly. There you go. So you can vote on whichever one makes sense to you, and we'll share the results soon. So our next panel is about 20 minutes, and we'll be talking about perspectives from several organizations, from Third World Network, Pesticide Action Network, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, and National Family Farm Coalition, about the biggest challenges their organizations are facing for food and agriculture systems, and why they think agroecological approaches represent the most comprehensive pathway for addressing those changes. So our first presentation will actually be a video presentation. So I'll let perhaps Colleen can post the poll results shortly, but just to introduce it, we'll be hearing from Lim Liching from Third World Network, who unfortunately could not be with us today, but sent a video for us to share. We asked her to share her thoughts on why an organization such as Third World Network, which is engaged in multilateral development goals on sustainability and spaces such as UN conventions on biodiversity and climate change, consider agroecological approaches as key to addressing these multiple crises. So perhaps, Colleen, if you can post the poll results, and then I think we will be going to this short video. So lots of answers across the board, which I suppose is one of the elements of agroecology, that it is so many things. So we will start now with the video from Xing.
Hi, my name is Lim Liching, and I coordinate the agriculture work at the Third World Network. We're an international policy research and advocacy NGO based in Malaysia. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our reflections on why agroecology offers the most comprehensive pathway to address multiple challenges and crises. We share this from our perspective as an organization that has consistently been engaging in multilateral governance spaces for over 30 years. Indeed, the world is facing worsening and interconnected climate, biodiversity, agricultural, health, and economic crises. The pandemic has further laid bare and deepened the inequities of our food systems. There are systemic flaws and vested interests that underpin these crises and continue to prop up what is essentially a failing industrial, agricultural, and food system. So my first point is, rather than tweaking unsustainable food and agricultural systems or just tinkering around the edges, we need to completely transform them, addressing root causes in an integrated way and providing holistic, resilient, and long-term solutions. How do we do this? Firstly, we need to move out of conditions that lock in industrial agriculture. This means taking on the tough task of dismantling the incentives and corporate monopolies that have kept industrial agriculture in place. Then we need to undertake structural reform, that is, enabling a paradigm shift from industrial food systems towards diversified agroecological systems. We need policies, institutions, and investments that support a transition to agroecology. But why agroecology? This is my second point. Agroecology is an integrated approach that applies ecological and social principles to the design and management of food and agricultural systems. It optimizes interactions between plants, animals, humans, and the environment. It includes socioeconomic and political aspects that enable sustainable and just food systems. It has a unique holistic capacity to reconcile economic, environmental, and social dimensions simultaneously. We know from the evidence that an agroecological transformation of agricultural systems is the most robust response to protecting biodiversity while promoting climate stabilization, healthy food, nutrition and diet, and systems resilience. There are numerous examples from around the world that conclusively show this, and farmers will be sharing their lived experiences in this webinar as well. Agroecology also supports circular and solidarity economies that reconnect producers and consumers. Territorial markets and short supply chains can enhance access to fresh, diverse and nutritious food, ensure greater value to farmers, and reduce vulnerability to disruptions on international markets. It is thus supportive of food sovereignty and livelihoods. Agroecology provides space for different trade and marketing systems that empower and allow small-scale and peasant farmers, indigenous peoples, women, and rural and urban communities to flourish. During the pandemic, we have seen many such examples of communities coming together, providing food, short-circuiting long supply chains, and building on community-supported agriculture. My third point, small producers, indigenous peoples, and women in particular contribute immensely to agriculture, and the diverse and resilient farmer seed systems and indigenous food systems are key foundations of agroecology. The rights of those who are at the forefront of this struggle and their rights over resources such as land, water, and seeds have to be respected, protected, and fulfilled. The various human rights instruments and standards have to be implemented at national levels. The current negotiations for a legally binding UN treaty on business and human rights could also play an important future role in reining in corporate excesses. How do other approaches compare? This is my fourth point. So-called nature-based solutions are not equivalent to agroecology. They do not incorporate the full range of transformative changes that agroecology engenders, from ecologically sound practices to social and economic justice to respect for human rights, agency, and empowerment. Instead, through carbon offsets to mitigate climate change, so-called nature-based solutions facilitate the appropriation of forests and lands, threatening to dispossess the indigenous peoples, local communities, and small producers who are the true stewards of the planet's biodiversity. Finally, we need to operationalize agroecology's principles of respect for farmers and traditional knowledge, and to enable deep changes in governance to foster equitable participation, empowerment and agency of peasants, women, fishers, livestock keepers, farm workers, those who produce and supply our food. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful, and I'm happy to see so many questions being raised now and documents being shared in the chat. For our next speaker, we have Marsha Ishii, who is a senior scientist at Pesticide Action Network North America, PANA. So in addition to being a scientist for PAN North America, she's also the coordinator of the Agroecology Group for Pesticide Action Network International. So clearly you've identified agroecological transformation as key to your work. Can you say more about that?
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Karen, and welcome everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you. I am going to share, oh, okay. All right, great. Well, I'll begin by introducing PAN. PAN is a global network founded in the Global South and dedicated to ending the devastating health, livelihood, and ecosystem harms posed by chemical pesticides. And yes, absolutely, we see agroecology as the most comprehensive and powerful solution to the pesticide problem. PAN has been fighting the harms of pesticide-dependent agriculture for over 40 years. Unfortunately, the reality today is that pesticide poisonings continue to affect millions of people every year. Next slide. A systematic review conducted by PAN and colleagues found that pesticides are responsible for an estimated 385 million cases of acute unintentional poisonings every year. And many of these have also been linked to an increase in chronic diseases such as cancers, developmental disorders, hormone system disruption, or reproductive problems. You can go ahead. 10 years of community monitoring by PAN UK showed that poisonings are widespread and prevalent around the globe, affecting from 40 to 80% of farmers and workers in the countries surveyed. Next slide. The pesticide problem persists because, simply put, pesticides are very big business. Analysis by PAN partner Public Eye, shown here, revealed that CropLife International, this is the global lobby association of the major pesticide multinationals, reaps over 1/3 of its income from the sale of highly hazardous pesticides. Next slide, or advance. It is in this actually the previous slide. Okay, it is in this context that UN experts have called these pesticides a global human rights concern because of their catastrophic impact on the environment, human health, and society as a whole. These UN experts have identified the sale, export, and relentless pressure to use chemical pesticides as responsible for the violation of numerous human rights. And these include the right to health and to a healthy environment now, to safe working conditions, to adequate food and clean water, to a dignified life, and as well, in particular, the rights of indigenous peoples and also of women and children not to be exposed to or have to use hazardous pesticides. To defend these human rights, we need a transformation of the agri-food system and also of the political and economic structures locking us into the corporate industrial model. Indeed, 40 years ago, PAN's founders declared that the pesticide problem was part of a larger structural problem. And they specifically named corporate power and influence over our governments, as well as pressure from the international financial institutions and so-called development institutions. Next slide. Today, we are seeing even more corporate overreach at the UN, the United Nations, where the UN Food and Agriculture Organization last year announced plans to formalize a partnership with none other than CropLife International, while simultaneously backpedaling on its commitments to agroecology. And we invite you to join us in our campaign to block that partnership from moving forward. In contrast, what we know is that building a movement to end the harm of pesticides requires global organizing to demand systems change. We know from our experience that it is never enough to simply replace one bad pesticide with another one that may turn out to be harmful in many other ways, while leaving intact a fundamentally flawed system that depends on the continuous exploitation of land and labor. Next. Agroecology, on the other hand, as we've been hearing, with its ecological, social, and cultural dimensions, its integration of knowledges and sciences, and its political analysis grounded in equity and justice, offers not only a way out of the trap of pesticide dependence, but also a way towards building sustainable and equitable agri-food systems in which communities, not corporations, are at the center of decision-making. That is why we put forward agroecology as the solution to pesticide harms in all of the spaces where we are active as a network, whether in negotiating international policy agreements to phase out pesticides in Geneva or in Rome, or in calling for the redirection of public resources to support farmers' transitions at home, or in promoting workers' rights to define the conditions of their work. For PAN, agroecology, or we might say a plurality of agroecologies, is what can enable us to move towards a pesticide-free and liberatory future. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. That was great. So our next panelist is Milion Belay, who is the founder of Melka Ethiopia and the general coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, or AFSA. He's joining us today from Kampala, Uganda. Both she and Marcia brought up the issue of rights. That's kind of central to the concept of food sovereignty. So from AFSA's perspective, can you tell us how you see agroecological transitions as central to your work?
Thank you very much, Karen. Thanks for inviting me. There's no light in Kampala now, so the room can be getting darker every minute. So in 2008, when we started the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, that one thing that we have agreed is to create a single and loud African voice on an issue that matters to us all. And the issue that matters to us all is agriculture, because over 70% of our people depend on agriculture for their livelihood, and agriculture is a main economy for most of our countries. Then question is, what kind of agriculture? As you know, there are competing paradigms in agriculture. On one hand, you have the green revolution agenda, the industrial agriculture agenda, focusing on agrochemicals, high-yielding varieties, and reorienting agriculture to market, to the needs of, to the vagaries of market, and all that. And I'm not going to go into that direction. But when we started to focus on agroecology around 2013, the level of understanding of agroecology among members of AFSA in general was not that huge and that deep. So we wanted to understand what agroecology is, but and went to explore whether agroecology would answer some basic and important questions for us. Questions of productivity, questions of health, questions of nutrition, questions of the environment. You know, we want an agricultural system who is friendly to the environment. Questions of cultural appropriateness. You know, the African is cultural hotbed, as you all know, and questions of human rights and the right to food. So we did collect cases from all over Africa, and the cases, you know, when we do the meta-level analysis of all these cases, we could see that, you know, agroecology ticks all of these boxes. So agroecology is very much important, and as our name implies, we are the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. That's why we are also very much interested in the social movement side of the agroecology, because, you know, food sovereignty politicizes the food agenda. It talks about cultural appropriateness of food, and addresses gender issues, and in the environmental sustainability issue, and food security does not address all this. So currently where we are going is exploring spaces to really help us to transition to agroecology in Africa. And I would mention one or two of these spaces. One is we have a project which is called Healthy Soil and Healthy Environment, where we are involving close to 20 African countries, farmers in these 20 African countries, and we are linking them with the Andhra Pradesh project, is community managed natural farming project in Andhra Pradesh. So there is a vibrant discussion of the soil building mechanisms in all these farms, you know, and the linkage with India. And also we are asking a question on what kind of market would help us to transition to agroecology, And we have decided to focus on territorial markets, and we're researching the territorial markets in Africa, and we are trying to link agroecological producers with consumers and also with the service providers. We are also exploring how we can use the climate emergency situation to transition to agroecology. So we are trying to integrate agroecology into climate policies in Africa, and this is happening in 12 African countries. And before even the UNFSS started, we have started a food policy dialogue in 24 African countries, and also at the regional, at the African Union level. And these dialogues were happening in these 24 African countries. Now we are doing the synthesis and influencing the African Union to consider an African food policy, which has agroecology as its center. And also we are using the COVID situation also, as an opportunity to educate the policymakers about the importance of African food and African vegetables, African crops, including root crops, how nutritious they are. So we are considering that also as a policy space. And as you all know, also we are ramping up our media strategy and communicating through social media and other media spaces. We have a bigger grouping of also African media houses now to really promote agroecology. So we are using all these spaces to promote agroecology. And thanks, Karen, again for inviting me to this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milian. We have so many wonderful speakers today. It's really a shame, but these are short presentations, but I do think they get to the heart of what different people are promoting. We had hoped to hear from Jim Goodman from the National Family Farm Coalition in the US next, and it seems like there may have been some mix-up. So perhaps we'll hear from him later, but I think we'll just go ahead and move on, unless someone tells me he has appeared. Anyway, let's move on with another poll. So before we hear the next panel, we'll be hearing from farmers around the world and about some of the impediments to agroecology. So here we've listed some of them, and we would urge you to look at these polls, answer them, and we'll see sort of where the audience stands at this point. So in this next segment, we'll hear from a farmer from each of the 5 continents, sharing their stories on what made them adopt agroecological practices and what the impediments are that they face. Some of them will be speaking one will be speaking at least one in Spanish, so be sure to have your interpretation button turned to the appropriate channel. So we will start soon with Busisiwe. Colleen, have people voted, or should we give it a little more time? There we go.
Just a little bit. Oh, there we go.
Oh, you popped it up. Of course, all of these issues are important, I would say. So thanks for that. So next, our first farmer is Busisiwe Mgeranzela. She's an organic agriculture farmer using agroecology principles to produce nutrient-dense, sustainable food. She integrates her farming with free-range chickens, affording the extra benefit of chicken manure for composting in addition to meat, chicks, and eggs. She's a member of the South African Organic Sector Organization based in Eastern Cape, and is a member of the Participatory Guarantee System, a quality assurance system. She is an activist promoting traditional seed saving and was also trained as a nurse. Busisiwe, what one thing made you adopt agroecological farmer? And if you have time, is there something that gets in the way?
Greetings. Thank you so much. I became an agroecology farmer in 2014. And agroecology is a system that produces diversity of nutrient-dense food that offers natural immunity to individuals. And as a previous health practitioner, a nurse educator, I know the value of good nutrition in maintaining healthy societies and the diversity in choice of food according to cultural preferences that is embedded in care, health, ecology, and fairness. The lost culture in agriculture is restored in agroecology. I am an agroecology farmer. I am a waged farm worker in my farm, and I am a consumer of my farm produced food. And one thing that gets in the way of agroecology is inadequate information. That is a lack of access to viable and already available information on agroecology, on soil fertility, organic pest management, and lack of resources to make necessary remedies. Thank you.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Thank you so much for that presentation. Next, we'll hear from Jason Lindsey, who is not only a farmer, but also works in the Southeast African American Farmers Organic Network in the United States. SAFON is a network of small and heritage Black farmers based in the US, and he works as a resource coordinator. A former teacher, his farming journey began a decade ago with a backyard garden, a passion for justice, and a connection to his agrarian heritage. So Jason, can you tell us your experience of shifting to agroecology, or what you call Afroecology, and what are the difficulties you've faced or continue to face as a beginning African American farmer? What is one thing you'd like to see changed?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I didn't really make the shift myself. What I found out was I was practicing agroecology, Afroecology, um, just through spirit and the way, and just trying to eat right and trying to provide the best for my family. I was already practicing these things and aligned politically in a lot of ways, and I didn't know it until I really became connected with the Spanish-speaking world. Um, in particular, folk out of Puerto Rico, um, and that's when I, realized the really language barrier that most indigenous or Black farmers, in particular here in the southeast of the United States, um, are practitioners of these type of practices and are aligned to these type of this type of politic, but the vocabulary does not is not there. We articulate in a very different way, but much like the technology that we're using here to be able to translate languages from English to Spanish or from English to French and things of that sort. There's a much need within throughout the Southeast for indigenous Black farmers to be able to um, understand just in what mighty ways are we interconnected. Um, I was already practicing these things, looking at ways in which I could, grow without any pesticides or anything like that. Looking for ways in which I can implement things which will cut the cost of farming, things of that sort, which allow me to be more of a service to my community. These type of efforts were already aligned in me. And what I found in finding agroecology is a community to join at the hip with to fight this good fight. But I think I've already stated one of the largest challenges that we are facing here in the Southeast is a vocabulary. I wouldn't even say language, but a vocabulary barrier in which disconnects the Black farmer of America from the peasant farmers across the world. And it's an illusion that really doesn't exist because the practices and the politics that we all align with here today are there and they're intact. And the horror and the trauma is there as well, but it's something that because we are stewards of the land, is a day-to-day healing process in relation.
Jason, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could I have you speak up just a little bit more? Some folks are saying that they can't hear you that well, and we are all interested in what you have to say.
I do apologize about that. I'm trying to figure out where I said last, but I was pretty much saying that, as a Black farmer here in the Southeast United States, there is an overwhelming aspect of farming being related to slavery. There's an overwhelming aspect of this because big ag rules, in particular here in the flatlands of North Carolina, where I reside. Big ag is so dominant. And so there's an illusion that we can't even grow without the assistance, quote unquote, of pesticides, herbicides, and all the rest of the sides. So has been, one of the ways in which I found a winning strike is just through demonstrating things of that sort and connecting this bridge, connecting the two sides with this language barrier, where we would call sharecroppers and other countries to call peasant farmers and things of that sort. All these things are direct things, and all these principles that we stand behind in growing are direct things that link us all. But that language barrier and that vocabulary barrier was what I will highlight as something that we have to work through in the coming days.
Thank you so much, and for keeping to time as well. So our next panelist is from Europe. We'll hear from Vincent Delobel, who is a certified organic goat farmer based in Belgium. He describes his farm as an autonomous family farm, producing all the feed they need, processing all their milk into soft and hard cheeses on the farm, and selling most of the products directly to consumers. Vincent was involved with the ECVC, European arm of La Via Campesina, when they were working for the creation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. Can you tell us why you and your family decided to shift to agroecology? And if you were to talk about one key change in support of agroecology, what would that be?
Hi, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. 25 years ago, what brought my family to change his farming practices is when we understood that the health of the soil, of the plants, of the animals, and ours were just one. Actually, we had health problems with intoxication. And also I was born with malformation, and many farmers and their families are paying a bit huge damage caused by pesticide exposition here in Europe. And it's unspoken and unstudied as well. And so, but individually, in the individual farm families, health is the major issue that brought people to change their practices. And on the side we had important soil compaction and erosion problems, weed resistance to herbicides, the increasing fragility of the health of our high performing animals. And but it's only when it hurt human health that the mind change happened, and then the farming practices changed. Eventually, it questioned our use of pesticides, but more broadly speaking, our dependence on agro industries up and downstream the farm. So we changed our practices to seek for more feed autonomy, producing our own feed on the farm instead of importing it, reducing tillage, planting more trees, increasing soil organic matter, saving farm seeds, processing and selling our products ourselves through fair chains, and also welcoming children and students on the farms. Now, at the moment, it has been recorded that more than 70% of the European farmers now engage spontaneously in one of these, let's say, more peasant-like farming practices. the key challenge, I think, and in my opinion, to go forward with agroecology is know that we have to globalize rights, rules, and protections mechanisms along the food chains. The dominant system made us slaves. We do, as a European producer, operate on distort, biased global food markets and chains that pushes us as a producer to produce more and more, to earn less and less, and to have less and less sustainable practices. In the south of Belgium, here where I live, more than 25% of farmers have a negative income. So it's very important to know that it's not because we are big producers that we are earning a decent income, and that's absolutely not the case. And yeah, through food, the dominant system made us slaves on different sides of the planet. And so our motto is that there is no free citizen on an empty stomach, nor there is a citizen fed in a healthy and sustainable manner without a free peasant. So we really have to claim that agroecology and peasants' rights are the warrants of democracy. The global peasant movement, the Via Campesina, we fought to make our fundamental rights to seeds, land, water, knowledge, but also a decent income, health, and safety at work, recognized on a UN declaration. And we had great support from a broad coalition of NGOs, but also in the public opinion, as this issue really talked to many people, not only as it go much beyond food. So the challenge for me and for such a coalition of organization, I think, is to this continuous struggle to make human rights and peasants' rights prevail on international trade agreements. In law, it is, but in fact, it is not. And we have to fight for this to make it prevail. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Marcela Calderon. Her presentation will be in Spanish, so if you need translation, be sure to click that box near the bottom. Marcela Calderon is an organic farmer who lives in Baigorita in Buenos Aires province in Argentina. She works with her two brothers and her mother and produces agroecological wheat, processes their wheat flour agroecologically, grows vegetables and fruit trees, and raises sheep, all through agroecological approaches. Marcela, what one thing made you and your family adopt agroecological farming? And if there's one thing you could highlight that gets in the way of practicing agroecology, what is it you would like to talk about?
Bueno, desde ya muchísimas gracias por permitirnos compartir nuestra experiencia. Bueno, nosotros veníamos del modelo agroindustrial, digamos, ya hace 10 años que estamos en lo que sería la agroecología. En realidad, a mí me gusta hablar de la agricultura, de la cultura del agro, por todo lo que significa específicamente, si nos vamos a la etimología de la palabra, de agricultura, esto de la cultura, de cultivar, del oculto. La cultura me lleva al individuo, me lleva a las raíces, me lleva a la identidad, digamos, y me siento más identificada, digamos, como agricultura, digamos, como agricultora y no como agroecóloga, digamos, me siento que me expande más, digamos, mi condición de individuo que hablar de la agroecología, ¿no? Y bueno, ¿qué es lo que nos hizo cambiar del modelo? Nosotros venimos de un modelo agroindustrial donde en su momento estábamos trabajando 2.500 hectáreas con, digamos, semilleros de punta, con la tecnología de punta, y bueno, empezamos a preguntarnos, digamos, atrás de qué zanahoria íbamos, ¿no? Esto de que esto de trabajar tantas hectáreas hacía que seamos nómades, ¿no? Y más en el territorio nuestro donde las extensiones son amplias, entonces, bueno, uno permanecía mucho tiempo afuera. Y bueno, esto hizo que empecemos a replantearnos nuestra calidad de vida, nuestro buen vivir. Y bueno, ahí empezamos a replantearnos y a sentir que ese modelo nos tenía como esclavos, que éramos esclavos de ese sistema y que estábamos trabajando para los demás y no estábamos trabajando para nosotros mismos, ¿no? Y que el sistema en sí, el sistema agroindustrial estaba colapsado, digamos, ya los rindes no eran los mismos, el resultado económico, digamos, no era el mismo, y también esto de empezar a tomar conciencia de la influencia de los agroquímicos, de lo que estaba haciendo, digamos, en el entorno, en nuestra propia vida y en la vida del lugar, del entorno, de la naturaleza. Y bueno, en esta toma de conciencia que uno empieza a transitar, se empieza a plantear, bueno, de este planeta Tierra, ¿no? de lo que significa en hectáreas y en población mundial. Planteamos a ver para qué nos tocó un pedacito de tierra, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que teníamos que hacer con ese pedacito de tener esta oportunidad de tener este pedacito de tierra? ¿Qué era lo que teníamos que hacer? Y bueno, esa toma de conciencia hace que nos empecemos a plantear qué huella de valor, digamos, qué en conciencia, qué era lo que íbamos a sembrar, qué era lo que queríamos cosechar, qué calidad de alimentos queríamos producir, ¿no? Donde el modelo industrial, digamos, genera los commodities y el modelo de la agricultura agroecológica, digamos, está pensando en el campesino, en la agricultura familiar, en esto de respetar el alimento y el alimento para todos los consumidores. Hoy todos los alimentos que consumimos a diario, el plato que tenemos de comida a diario, viene de la mano de un agricultor, de un campesino, ¿no? de la agricultura familiar. Y esos fueron, digamos, los planteos, ¿no? que empezamos a hacernos y a tomar esta conciencia donde el modelo agroindustrial tiene en cuenta el poder, el tener, cuando en el modelo agroecológico, en la agricultura agroecológica, donde prevalece es el individuo, el ser, digamos, ¿no? Y bueno, y prevalecer al individuo en sí. Y bueno, en realidad, digamos, con las trabas que nos encontramos, fue un poco con la falta también de políticas de Estado, donde no prevalece la educación, donde no prevalece el conocimiento, donde el modelo agroecológico o la agricultura agroecológica tiene que ver con eso, ¿no? En principal con la educación, con la sabiduría, con esta toma de conciencia de que para qué estamos viviendo, ¿no? Para qué es lo que nos toca hacer y cuál realmente va a ser la huella de valor que queremos dejar en este tránsito por la vida. Y en esto es importante también la función que vamos a tener, digamos, las mujeres para la transformación, ¿no? Para seguir transformando todo este proceso de mejorar la calidad de vida de todos los individuos del planeta. ¿Por qué? Porque la mujer es la que nutre. Si nos copiamos, si leemos la función de la mujer en la naturaleza la hembra es la que nutre, la que alimenta, la que elige, digamos, cómo educa a sus crías. Y bueno, creo que esa es un poco la función que tenemos como mujeres agricultoras, esto de qué calidad de nutrición queremos para nuestros hijos, para nuestra familia, para nuestro entorno, y no solo en alimentos, sino en sabiduría, en en prevalecer los seres, los saberes, los sabores, ¿no? La importancia en elegir esto de la comida, ¿no? que estamos dándole, y la calidad de la comida, la calidad del alimento, ¿no? Un alimento libre de químicos de síntesis, todo lo que significa, digamos, todo ese manejo o manipulación en la alimentación. Y creo que cierro con estas dos frases, que la agricultura debe ser reconocida como una tarea imprescindible para la continuidad de la vida de la tierra, y que el día en que se empodere el oficio del trabajador de la tierra, que somos los agricultores, digamos, y que va a ser el oficio del futuro, el mundo va a empezar a cambiar. Desde ya, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Marcela, for those inspiring words. We have one last speaker on this panel who's from the Philippines, Nong Erisasi. Is he there? If you can turn on your video, I want to make sure there you are. Okay, I see you popping up now. He is a farmer partner of the Southeast Asia Regional Initiatives for Community Empowerment since 1994. He is practicing diversified and integrated farming system in his own farm. And he is the president of President Rocha's Integrated Farming Association in Mindanao, Philippines. Mr. Nong, what made you a farmer? What made you as a farmer want to shift to agroecological practices? And what's one challenge you would like to see addressed?
Thank you, Ma'am Karen. I hope my audio is clear. So before I shift to agroecology farming, let me share you my experience upon the introduction of Green Revolution before. That was year 1970s. We have experienced outbreak of pest and disease in our farm due to excessive use of hazardous chemicals that create immunity to pests, and the imbalanced environment due to spraying that kills beneficial insects that go against the harmful. So before I shift to agroecology farming, CIDSE conducted training to us farmers here in the Philippines regarding the ecological pest management, whereby they teach us how to control pest and disease through cultural control and biological control. Then they teach us the technique how to protect the environment, technique how to culture different fishes as one of our integrated in our farm, the diversified and integrated way of farming. So they also teach us how to breed. This technology that was given to us, we also share it to our co-farmers in the farm. Important reason why I was encouraged to practice agroecological system, because of these benefits: food security, health and safety of human being as well as animals, environmental protection and conservation, to make a balanced ecosystem, climate change adaptation, sustainable family income, and protection of biodiversity. One problem why we are hardly to advance agroecology system, because of the introduction of this new technologies, lack of government support on organic and diversified farming. Example is materials, the training and organic farming technology, extension service related to agroecology, inappropriate policies that favors large private companies and does not recognize farmers' shade system, and the use of GMO. So agroecology system is of great help to us. Before we practice monocropping, then we experience this outbreak of pest and disease. So we have a negative income. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. So we will be going to our next and final panel today, discussing some of the impediments to agroecology and what's happening to support the advancement of agroecology with an eye to policy. So our first speaker is Nina Muller. She is Associate Professor at the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience based in the UK. She's interested in a wide range of transdisciplinary approaches to agroecology, food systems, and environmental challenges, especially but not limited to subsistence, livelihoods, and agrarian change. She, along with colleagues from Agroecology Now, were the lead authors in a recent study on development finance for agroecology.
Hi there. Can you see me? Can you hear me? I hope. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you so much for having me today. There we go. Okay. So this panel was asked particularly to consider impediments to agroecological transition. And to do so, one of the things that I think we really need to look at is funding, money. And what I want to do today is show you some data on what money flows actually to agroecology, what actually goes. So despite an increasing recognition and a plethora of international reports, organizations, and platforms, all pointing to agroecology as a crucial part of the solution, we have clear evidence that actual financial support for an agroecological transition remains really minimal. And in 2018, Michelle Pimber and I concluded our first study on UK aid. And since then, there have been a number of other analyses focusing on development aid from European countries. And as you can see here, the green slice refers to funding that contributes to an agroecological transformation. And with the exception maybe of Switzerland, funding for agroecological transformation remains really very, very small. And earlier this year, there was another study that was published on Dutch ODA, development assistance, which shows again that only 4% of Dutch aid flows are supportive of agroecological transformation. So at this stage, you might potentially ask what actually counts as supportive of agroecological transformation and what doesn't. So before I throw another handful of pie charts at you, which I will, I'm just going to want to quickly explain that all of these analyses make use of Stephen Gleesman's 5 levels of food system change, which many of you will be familiar with. And so this moves from increasing the efficiency of industrial practices and then via substituting less harmful practices and redesigning the agroecosystem to building an equitable and sustainable global food system. That's the sort of trajectory. And these analyses consider projects that adopt efficiency-oriented approaches at level 1. So for example, sustainable intensification to represent conventional agricultural approaches. Efficiency improvements are really of integral concern to conventional agriculture, and they cannot be said to contribute to an agroecological transformation. But projects at level 2 which focus on substituting environmentally harmful inputs with ecological alternatives or practices, are considered a sort of intermediary step away from conventional agriculture towards transformative agroecological change. And only projects at level 3 or above fully contribute to transformative agroecology. Okay, so that should give you a little bit an idea of the concept we've been using.
Nina,
so back to some graphs. Yes?
Could you speak just a little bit more slowly for our translators?
Yes, sorry about that. I'm rushing through because I want to impart all this information. So this chart analyzes the Green Climate Fund's agricultural portfolio. And you can see again that we're looking at very small amount of funding, or maybe we should actually say that we're looking at overwhelming support for the industrial agricultural paradigm. And the GCF, in case you don't know, is responsible for funding climate adaptation and mitigation in developing countries. So that is maybe quite disappointing. And the picture looks similar in the case of the agricultural funding made available by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the money received by and spent in Kenya on agricultural research and development. Again, the green slice denotes agroecological support. And this is the study by BioVision and IPES Food. And finally, just one more detailed look at the EU money that is being spent. And again, you can see that none of the money that was spent in the 3 years between 2016 and 2018 via the FAO, via the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and via the World Food Programme is fully supportive of agroecological transformation at this level 3, at this fully transformative agroecology. The 2.7% that were made available actually only supported projects at level 2. All these studies underline the necessity of shifting both international development assistance and climate finance away from supporting an agricultural sector that is geared towards large petrochemical dependent agribusiness, and shifting it away from that towards an agroecological transition. I don't know if I have time to conclude with a last final thought.
Very quick.
Yeah, so there is, in order to be supportive of an agroecological transition, an increase in funding needs to be backed by changes in the mode in which this funding is made available to agroecology. So, for example, some studies show that public-private partnerships are not efficient ways to finance smallholder agriculture. And large grants are not the solution either. So what we need is a divestment in industrial agriculture and corporate food systems, and a complete cessation of public funds in support of large agribusiness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. So next we have Francesco Ajena. And I understand it's his birthday today. Is he around? Please turn on your video. So
I'm trying, but I'm unable.
Oh, okay. Well, it can be without the video. So Francesco is an international consultant specializing in agroecology. He currently works at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, and UNFAO. He's also, since 2017, worked for the as policy advisor for the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES Food. So Francesco, with all of these different roles, you've been trying to advance agroecology. What are your recommendations to policymakers?
Okay, thank you, Karen. So I'll try. It's a very complex topic, and I only have 4 minutes, so I'll try to go through it as quickly and clearly as possible. So, as we have seen, as we know, the dominant industrial food systems have co-developed with the policy environments that actually have ensured that the industrial food systems remain in place. And in order to, for those innovations that we've been hearing very interestingly today, both social and technical innovations, farmers trying to implement agroecological transitions. We absolutely need an enabling policy environment for those innovations to be successful. But nowadays we have everything but not an enabling policy environment. We have exactly the contrary, which is a policy environment that is locking the food systems into the industrial models, which, as we know, are not delivering any of the urgent global challenges that we have. So the link between agroecology and policy has increasingly gained attention in food systems debate. We have seen many countries and regions, including in the European Union, discussions about how we should implement agroecological policy taking place, and an academic debate also that's increasingly giving attention to this topic. We do have, differently from the organic movement, a sort of bigger obstacle, which is the fact that in the agroecological movement in general, people are reluctant to implement regulations aimed at labeling the production processes and products as agroecological. So this is, of course, from a policymaker's point of view, an obstacle in order to implement those policies that should be enabling or creating a level playing field for agroecology. So the first of the takeaway or the messages that I wanted to give is that in order to design agroecological policy, I think we have started this discussion indeed when I was working with IPES Food and participation with a coalition at the European Union level of more than 50 NGOs working in food systems. We have started these discussions and we have come out with a very basic but important, I think, consideration is the fact that in order to design agroecological policies and agroecological transformations from a public governance point of view, we should start from what we have. And what we have are the 10 elements of agroecology that have been voted and adopted by the FAO Council, and the principles also that are very clear as explained and described in the HIP report on agroecology and other innovations. So the 10 elements that many of you or all of you already know are define the characteristic of agroecological systems, but also from an agronomic point of view, but also the social characteristic, the economic ones, and they represent a promising tool to design the policies that should be or can be creating that level playing field and enabling policy environment for agroecological innovation to spark. Another important thing which I have been researching on and discussing also with FAO is the importance of promoting integration of the different policies. And this is something that also IPES Food has been working on in 2019, indeed, with an important report for a common food policy for the European Union, a sort of integrated food policy package approach to transform European food systems. Agroecology promotes the integration at different levels, from the farm scale to the landscape, but I also think ultimately it promotes the integration also at the food governance of the food systems level, promoting integrated food policy. It's really something that comes out from the whole approach, systemic approach that agroecology has. And policy packages or integrated food policy have an important thing. First of all, they can address the nexuses and the synergies and minimizing the trade-off between different policies that are addressing that are regulating different aspects of food systems, from economic policies and social safety nets, policies that are aimed at subsidize agriculture and so on and so forth. So a systemic approach, because food systems are systems and they need systemic approach in order to be changed, because they have been shaped again within an industrial food system model which need to be changed. So we need to address it in a systemic manner. But from a policy perspective, I think what is also important to mention, and there has been, I'll be putting a link in the chat later, and I think a very interesting article in Nature Food a couple of years or 1 year ago regarding political feasibility. Political feasibility is very important. I have been working as as a policy advisor for a Green Party, which was very much in favor of an agroecological transition. But you still have, even when we are in favor, even when agroecology is a part of your program, you still have the problem of do I have the political capital in order to implement certain reforms that are very ambitious in most of the cases, because we really need to shift and somehow drastically towards sustainable food systems. Policy packaging have been proven in that study to be enhancing.
Sorry, we're going to need you to wrap up.
I'm going too far. Yeah, sorry. So political feasibility, policy packaging, and having a systemic approach at the policy level can really increase the political feasibility. And then, so as been mentioned, from a policy perspective, where are we getting the money in order to implement those reforms? There has been another important report recently published by FAO, UNDP, and UNEP that flagged how much, but we already knew that, the money going into agricultural support is actually a wrong investment, and how much do we need to repurpose that? So we do have the money to implement those policies. We just need to change, to shift the focus, and investing in food systems policy approaches can be a very promising way to repurpose all that money. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you. I feel terrible cutting people off because these are all such great presentations, but we will be sharing the recordings, and hopefully we can all be in touch in the future as well. Our next panelist is Timothy Wise. Tim is a senior advisor at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and also a senior research fellow at Tufts University's Global Development and Environment Institute, where he founded and directed its Globalization and Sustainable Development Program. He also served previously as executive director of the U.S. aid agency Grassroots International. Tim, you were very involved in a recent campaign asking governments to redirect funding away from AGRA. Can you share some of your thoughts on that campaign?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Thanks to everyone for these amazing presentations. Such a collection of impressive and diverse perspectives and experiences. To me, it really represents the diversity that we're all looking for in the food system as well. I think going directly off of what Nina was presenting, the research that I've done and some of the work with African civil society organizations such as Million Belay and the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, the Southern Africa faith communities, Environment Institute, it has focused on the need to disrupt and redirect the funding that is now being devoted to industrial agricultural systems in Africa. That looks a lot like the Green Revolution in Africa, the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, funded mainly by the Gates Foundation, but also by USAID, by UK Aid, by the Rockefeller Foundation, has gotten $1 billion in funding. And our research has shown that in 15 years, it has produced mediocre results, even in its own narrow terms. Productivity has gone up barely more quickly than it did before the Green Revolution push started again in 2006. Poverty is still endemic in rural areas, and most alarming, in AGRA's 13 focus countries, hunger has had, the number of undernourished people has gone up 30%. And that was before the pandemic hit, and that was before the most recent alarming statistics showing that across sub-Saharan Africa, the number of undernourished people has actually increased 50% since AGRA started in 2006, far from its goal of cutting food insecurity in half. It is actually taking Africa in exactly the opposite direction. What makes this so relevant as an obstacle to to agroecology, which some of the civil society groups such as AFSA have been advocating for many years, is that it's very difficult to open a lane in government, both a policy lane and a funding lane for supporting agroecological processes if the Green Revolution approach is gobbling up all of the resources, and it does. And the donors are not the only or maybe the biggest problem here. African governments themselves are spending huge amounts on subsidizing the purchase of exactly these Green Revolution inputs, commercial seeds and fertilizers. The government of Malawi in some years has spent 60% of its entire agricultural budget on seed and fertilizer subsidies. Those subsidies end up going through farmers, but they end up going indirectly to companies. Monsanto is now Bayer is the largest provider of commercial maize seeds in Malawi. They are the beneficiaries of these policies, which sort of brings me back to the obstacles to the implementation of agroecology. We need to interrupt this commitment on the part of donors and governments to this failing model, and our research shows it is failing. But beyond that, we need to direct our attention to the corporate power that lies at the root of these policies. Corporate concentration is increased in the food sector dramatically. Seed mergers and takeovers, continuing to consolidate an industry that's already consolidated, that produces political power that's more concentrated as well. And that is a challenge, but one that groups like AFSA are very strongly fighting back against. And they stood up with a direct challenge, a public letter that IATP helped co-sponsor to all agri-donors, demanding that they cease funding for Green Revolution programs and for agri. That is out there now, and we plan to direct our attentions to our own government and challenge their commitment to these continued and failing efforts to try to open a lane for agroecology. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Next, we have Dr. Cecilia Elizondo, who worked with the Argentine government for over 10 years before becoming part of Mexican academia over 2 decades ago. She served in the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources in Mexico and continues now with the academic staff at the Agroecology group at El Colegio de la Frontera Sur. Her presentation will be in Spanish, so please be sure you have the translation thing selected. And we'll hear from Cecilia on the efforts to advance agroecology through national policy initiatives in Mexico.
Y muchas gracias. Bueno, solo para aclarar, en la traducción salió que soy ministra de Medio Ambiente, pero no, fui coordinadora de asesores, es como Chief of Cabinet en Medio Ambiente en 2019-2020, solo para aclarar ese detalle. Bueno, aquí en México, la política nacional para el control de los insumos externos en la agricultura, la disminución gradual del glifosato y transgénicos, así como la transición agroecológica, va más allá de una política del sector agrícola, como muchos aquí lo han venido diciendo. No se trata solamente de una parte técnica o de un solo sector. Como Aquí, pues bueno, hago un paréntesis también para mencionar lo que muchos deben haber escuchado, un poco como Tim hablaba de la importancia de la fuerza de la sociedad civil para hacer una resistencia ante todas estas corporaciones. Han salido notas periodísticas que lo comparan con David contra Goliat, el tema de la ganancia ante la Suprema Corte de Justicia de México, de la prohibición, de mantener la prohibición del maíz transgénico. Es una lucha de esta organización denominada demanda colectiva contra el maíz transgénico, y fue una lucha de casi una década, y fueron 50 y tantas personas que forman este grupo y que hicieron esta resistencia, ¿no? Comenzó en 2013, pero también es cierto que la coyuntura actual que el gobierno federal en México ha brindado también ayudó a que esto sucediera, porque en el pasado había favorecimiento a estas corporaciones y no sé cuál podría haber sido el resultado si ese control de las corporaciones siguiera en el gobierno. Entonces, desde el inicio de esta administración, en febrero del 2017, se formó un grupo, el Grupo Intersectorial de Salud, Alimentación, Medio Ambiente y Competitividad, con un objetivo en mente: transformar el sistema alimentario, como se llama este seminario, de la producción al plato, del campo al plato. Conscientes de que el sistema actual, totalmente insostenible, fue el que favoreció la degradación de los recursos naturales y de sus servicios ecosistémicos. Tiene mecanismos de comercialización y distribución y abasto excluyentes e ineficientes, y además generó una epidemia de malnutrición como consecuencia para la salud de la población mexicana por el alto consumo de ultraprocesados y bebidas azucaradas. Entonces, este grupo tiene a distintas dependencias que de alguna manera tienen relación con los sistemas alimentarios: la Secretaría de Salud, la Secretaría mismo del Trabajo, el Consejo de Ciencia y Tecnología, además de que forman parte también organismos internacionales. También está la Institución de Pueblos Indígenas. Y en estos 3 años que ya GISAMAC, como se lo denomina, está trabajando, ha logrado, por un lado, la Ley Federal de Fomento y Protección del Maíz Nativo. Por eso les decían que ya hay una coyuntura que ayudó también a que los jueces de la Suprema Corte de Justicia tengan una base sólida en la cual poder decirle a las corporaciones no. O sea, está esta ley que fomenta proteger el maíz nativo, que fue publicada en 2020. Por otro lado, se tiene también el decreto presidencial para sustituir gradual y progresivamente el glifosato al 2024, además de que también prohíbe la entrada del maíz transgénico. O sea, son 2 documentos fundamentales para que con esa base jurídica pudiera la Corte tomar una decisión. Por otro lado está el etiquetado frontal de alimentos, que se logró aprobar en noviembre del 2019 y entró en vigor en octubre del 2020, y en ese pequeño periodo, menos de un año, las empresas de alimentos ultraprocesados cambiaron más de 1000 fórmulas de sus alimentos para que sus productos no tuvieran tantos sellos. Entonces, sí se puede cambiar, y ese ya fue una ganancia directa que esta medida de poner el etiquetado frontal tuvo. Por otro lado, también está la Estrategia Nacional de Transición Agroecológica. En todo esto de que no hay apoyo a la agroecología, lo sabemos y hemos luchado en el Consejo de Seguridad Alimentaria para que eso sucediera en el documento de recomendaciones de políticas de agroecología, y no lo logramos. Pero bueno, aquí la Secretaría de Agricultura está apoyando a más de 2 millones de agricultores, de trabajadores en el campo, que están trabajando hacia la transición agroecológica. Por otro lado, también el programa Sembrando Vida ya no está beneficiando con ningún agroquímico tóxico en esta producción de plantas, y no solo son plantas y árboles, sino también son sistemas agroforestales, sistemas de café, sistemas de diferentes productos que se están apoyando. Hay una plataforma de capacitación para avanzar hacia la transición agroecológica que se acaba de salir hace un mes, que también es en parte entre todas estas instituciones, la Secretaría de Educación, la Secretaría de Economía, el Consejo de Ciencia y Tecnología, y varias otras instituciones, y en esta plataforma van a poder, es una plataforma gratuita que no solo es para servidores públicos, sino también para el público en general que puede tener ahí. Por otro lado, también se estableció una campaña desde la Presidencia de la República de comunicación sobre, ¿sí? Perdón,
We're
ya
going to need to
termino.
wrap up.
Yes. De alimentación saludable. También con los jornaleros en el tema de COVID se trabajó con la Secretaría de Trabajo para mejorar eso. Está una asignatura de vida saludable en las escuelas. Entonces, como vemos, es un trabajo en conjunto. El subsecretario de México, Víctor Suárez Cabrera, en la última reunión 49 del Consejo de Seguridad Alimentaria, hizo un llamado clarísimo. Es necesario que tengamos una transformación en el marco regulatorio global, y que se utilice este ejemplo de México, que lo podemos hacer globalmente, y si no logramos eso, ese marco regulatorio para todos los sistemas alimentarios en el mundo, no vamos a lograr el cambio de este sistema infame que tenemos y que viene con una revolución verde recargada. Perdón por el tiempo, gracias.
I really wish we had more time, and in fact, I would encourage if the speakers can stay on just a few minutes after the hour, we'd like to answer at least some of the many great questions that have come up. So our final speaker is Alberta Guerra from ActionAid, Alberta is Senior Policy Analyst with ActionAid USA and leads ActionAid's advocacy at the UN food agencies. We'd like Alberta to talk about recent discussions at the Committee on Food Security on the definitions of agroecological principles and how you see that playing out as we move forward.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to the participants. Well, first of all, just to say that ActionAid is part of organizations that actively support agroecology, of course. So thank you for inviting me. It's a really honor to be in this panel. And ActionAid was also very supportive of all the process that took place within the CFS in the negotiation of the policy recommendations. And so let me start with just trying to organize my intervention to keep in 4 or 5 minutes. So first of all, the fact that the CFS recognized and included agroecology on the agenda, and we embarked in this negotiation process was at the time a big result and was a step in the pathway to scale up agroecology in the political agenda of donors and governments. This effort started with the first FAO International Symposium that was held in 2014. Then the second international symposium organized by the FAO as well in 2018. And then we got this agroecology in the agenda of the Committee on World Food Security work plan. And that time was on the one hand a big result because this showed the increased interest and the recognition that agroecology had to be dealt with in the highest UN space. On the other hand, since the beginning, I mean, it started with many challenges because US and other agri-exporter countries first tried to block this decision and to just prevent CFS from tackling and discussing agroecology. But then when this proved impossible, what we did and unfortunately managed to get in was to address agroecology and other agroecological and other innovative approaches. So basically the approach they adopted was to, okay, let's not focus on agroecology only, but let's try to associate agroecology with other practices, which all we know are not sustainable. So they try to push for GMOs, for climate-smart agriculture, sustainable intensification. And unfortunately, they managed to do that because since the beginning, the process started with this framework. So we couldn't have a process entirely focused on agroecology, but we have had always to coexist with this ambivalence. And unfortunately, this is also, I mean, this was reflected in the final outcome. The policy recommendations have been negotiated, and the negotiation concluded in May. They were approved in June. And even if there are some good elements, what is there is that first, it's not as progressive as we have expected as a civil society. And in some parts might be really even dangerous for advancing agroecology, especially on the language around agrochemicals. And this was the result of having this forced coexistence between agroecology and other practices, and also the political context, because in the CFS, but not just the CFS, we know that many governments were not supporting agroecology. Some others were supportive of like a narrow vision of agroecology, so not, for example, rejecting the issue of agency and the
Alberta?
role of peasant. Yes?
Could I have you slow down just a little bit for our translators?
Oh,
thank you.
Sorry, apologize. In the recommendations, there were some concepts that were rejected, like the ecological footprint, the concept of true cost accounting, in favor of concepts like synergies, compensation, minimization of risks, optimization. So these are all concerns. Of course, I mean, we have also to recognize that this recommendation in some parts might be useful, particularly to advance agroecology, maybe not just to advance, but to open some space to discuss about agroecology and its potential in transforming the food system in the more conservative spaces and governments, because of course, I mean, this is an institutional and intergovernmental agreed framework, a recommendation so that they can be used. But at the same time, so we need to be very conscious about the limitations, the shortfalls, and also about the fact that there are some language that in the end, it's really unacceptable because agroecology can't coexist with agrochemicals. And of course, this can be ignored. At the same time, I mean, another point that I would like to stress that other panelists highlighted before, the FAO 10 elements, the HLP 13 principles. The CFS policy process starts with a report by the high-level panel of experts, and the high-level panel of experts produced this report on agroecology and other innovative approaches, and they did a really amazing job in trying to keep the original concept of agroecology. The concept has developed by social movements, particularly anchoring to the 11 principles from the Nyeleni Forum that social movements organized in 2015, but also did a great job in also to try to establish a framework to assess all the approaches and help navigate this forced coexistence and come up with a result, with the outcome that agroecology is the best solution to address the multiple crises and to move towards a sustainable food system. So my last point is that, of course, I mean, we need to continue to stress the FAO 10 elements and the 13 IATP principles as the framework that we want to use, and particularly to avoid the risk of cooptation, to be sure that any initiative that wants to support agroecology at political level is anchored to the right concept of agroecology, and also to support the shifting of funding and the development of policies that are supportive of the real transforming agroecology. Sorry to rush. I try to really squeeze my intervention in 4 minutes.
I know. I so wish we had more time. We're going to pass on. I'm going to pass on to my colleagues Shiny and Vincent for a couple of questions and answers, but then we hope to pass on the wide array of questions to the panelists to follow up in written form later as well.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this being part of this webinar, and thank you to stay till the end. Shiny, I will give you the floor for the first question, I believe. Thank you.
Yeah, delighted to be joining on camera with everybody. And for this last part of the webinar, and happy to be joining once or here. So we have very little time left to answer more than 23 questions. So clearly we won't be able to go through many of them. Just take a couple of them. And I was just thinking that many of the speakers have identified corporate power as a big challenge. And I see that one of the questions specifically deals with that, where it identifies from Walter Pengue. He says that one of the main threats to agroecological movement is co-optation, where agroecology is emptied out of its holistic content, especially taking only one part. And it is absolutely true that that this co-optation at that time, it basically pays maybe a little bit of attention to the biophysical aspects and leaving out everything else. So the field of agroecology has been evolving over the decades because of the open-mindedness of those engaged in the study of it and those engaged in the practice of it. And I feel that those trying to co-opt the term seems to be stuck in the 60s or even earlier, where it was basically about biophysical aspect. And, you know, it is definitely shows the close-mindedness of the community rather than anything else, I feel. Anyway, so today, as the panel one showed, what people were talking about, agroecology has evolved to, at a time of this increasing global food insecurity, as a solution to help multiple crises. And so the question from Walter is, how do the speakers in their countries deal with this co-optation, given companies, governments, and other sectoral movements, or and even FAO and UN itself? What strategies do we have to sustain it and not fall into the trap of agroecology getting co-opted? And so a number of people over here can answer this. Maybe I will ask Marcia from panel one to answer this question.
Thank you.
Marcia, yeah.
Thank you, Shiny. Yes, and yeah, many others have deep experience in this. Yes, it's a very important question. I would say that we cannot cede our public policy spaces to these corporations. And so we need to organize and call out and reject where we see this corrupting influence happen. So as I've mentioned and dropped into the chat, there are ways that we are organizing. PAN, as well as many of the organizations on this call, have joined us in a global campaign to stop the UN FAO's alliance with CropLife International. And it is not just about stopping pesticide company influence at the FAO, but that is really emblematic or symptomatic of what is happening. We are seeing happening across the UN in many spaces. So it's important to make clear, to draw a line in the sand, so to speak, and expose that this is going against all the expressed needs in violation of the human rights that we've been talking about. At the same time, I think it's very important that we, while we fight these battles, that we also build up from the ground up and support the local transitions that are happening, that we support local farmers, that we support workers, campaigns for workers' rights. And we can do that by, both organizing at the local level. There are some very exciting developments with very participatory democratic food policy councils. For example, you can look up what's happening in Valencia, Spain. There's work happening at the provincial and municipal levels in many parts of the world. So building up and being in solidarity with farmers and workers in the food system to defend their rights and to invest our own resources, as mutual aid, as local to local. We cannot wait, as I think someone mentioned in the chat, for these global policy changes to take place. We need to build together relationships, one-to-one, direct community to community. And at the same time, we still need to expose what is happening in these spaces for someone based in the United States, here on Turtle Island. We also have a responsibility to challenge and stop our own government from interfering in the sovereign decisions of countries like Mexico, and the forward attempts and efforts by, say, Senegal to promote agroecology. And Tim Weiss has written quite a lot about this. So we have many ways in which we can engage, and we have a responsibility to also interact with our own policymakers at local and national levels. And also, just one last thing, we do need to stop this double standard by which northern industrial countries in particular are exporting banned pesticides to the global south.
Thank you, Marcia. I don't know if there is another panelist who want to react to this question, or we go to another one. I see no hands. Okay, I would like to ask a question, and mainly for the farmers.
Perdón, yo solo sí quisiera decir, hemos analizado mucho este tema y justamente lo que hemos platicado y lo que mencionamos es que la cooptación no puede llegar al territorio. Entonces, aparte de que trabajemos a nivel global, sí el trabajo territorial, así como Marcela misma comentaba desde Argentina, ellos estaban totalmente cooptados por la agroindustria, sin embargo, ellos toman la decisión de hacer un cambio. Entonces, si logramos esos cambios desde el territorio, es muy difícil que esos territorios puedan ser cooptados nuevamente. Nada más. Gracias.
Thank you very much. No other panelists wants to react to that? No. Okay, I would like to ask another question. And first, I think it's for the farmers. In the chat and in the Q&A's panel, there was some question about how can we engage more people in agroecology, because one of the main elements for farmers is to get money, so how can we make them more engaged into agroecology, because agroecology connects to other issues that maybe they don't know. And that's linked to another question, that how can we make the youth engage into agroecology? And yes, I think it would be great to hear a farmer who made that switch, so that he can maybe understand, explain to us. And I don't know, I can give the floor to Jason if you're still there.
I am. I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
I was saying, okay, sorry. I was saying that in the chat, many people were saying that how can we engage more people into agroecology? Because one of the main elements for a farmer at the end, it's still money. And so agroecology is still not competing, I would say, or it's complicated to get that money. And the other question is how can we make the youth engage into agroecology? Because if we want to make the switch into a world where agroecology would be the main approach to food system, we need to make people engage into it. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry I can't come on by video. My connection is acting up a little bit, but I think I understand your question. I think the answer is clear. You know, when I came into agriculture, you know, almost a decade ago now, not even understanding the terminology around agroecology, but understanding it on a spiritual base, on a land connection base, there were no pathways for me to travel. You know, I had recently came out of college, so going back into, you know, the collegiate world and accumulating more debt was just out of the question. You know, I had started a family and things, you know, so I think the answer is clear, and in a lot of ways today have been addressed, and looking at the ways that agroecology is being resourced. We have to create pathways for people to travel. We have to create, you know, these safe havens through our land-based institutes. You know, now when I say land-based institutes, I'm not necessarily saying a university, and neither am I excluding them. You know, but I'm saying like safe havens within our community. You know, farms in which we're actually, you know, growing together, healing together, and being able to provide and have something to protect. You know, these aspects of training have to be laid forth. It has to be curriculum based. We have to steep our children in this. I believe it was Frederick Douglass who said, "I'd rather train up the children than to retrain men." So I think our best bet in actually coming out triumphant, which I believe we will, because we are connected and we really through these fights are speaking for the land in these languages that many misconceive. So we have to open up pathways for our youth to be able to travel through. There has to be direct connecting points in which we can touch, which our youth will be able to touch. And I feel the younger that we start that, the better off that we'll be.
Thank you very much, Jason. I don't know if there is another person on the panel who would like to give his.
Yes, Vincent. That's Busisiwe from South Africa, as I've written on the chat. On the chat as like now, when I said sometimes there is much as the information is there for us to access, but they don't know that the information, because sometimes the language or the methods that the information is set into is not even like friendly to the farmers. And mind you, most farmers that are agroecology are coming from the rural areas. So if we do campaigns and use these organizations like SAFSE, as I've made an example, that is representing a lot of different groups, whether it's religion, whether it's traditional leaders and policy makers and everybody to know. And because there's a lot of information that is there, but people are not aware. And you know, use the old material, newspapers, the books, the schools, the radios to disseminate this information to farmers so that then people are aware of agroecology. And you know, the farmer to farmer schools and farmer to farmer visits, farmers speaking about their successes, so that then they know that here is a farmer who is doing this, like me, just like me, but she's succeeding in this agroecology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Marcella and then to Shiny to wrap up, or maybe another question, I don't know, but I think it's time to say bye-bye. So go ahead, Marcella. Thank you.
Sí, lo que quería reforzar en el concepto es que los agricultores es bastante difícil que cambie porque son bastante conservadores y me parece que todo el accionar, digamos, por supuesto que sobre los agricultores también, pero trabajar mucho sobre los consumidores que realmente van a ser los que van a empezar a cambiar, a elegir, digamos, qué alimentos consumir y a exigir qué alimentos consumir. Y bueno, y por supuesto todo lo que tenga que ver con la educación, con la información, con el conocimiento y con la toma de conciencia en la calidad de alimentos que queremos como individuos. Creo que todo el trabajo tiene que ver con eso, ¿no? Y esta toma de conciencia que la salud está en la comida, que la salud de la comida está en el suelo, que si el suelo es sano, digamos, vamos a tener salud, ¿no? Tomar esta conciencia desde la educación en todos los niveles.
Thank you very much. This is work for us now. Shiny, I will give you the floor for the final word and to say thank you and yes, thank you for this webinar. Thank you. You are muted, Shiny. You are muted.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Hi. We have ran over the time. It's 20 minutes past. We had budgeted for 15 minutes past, but this is way too long. So we are cutting down on a couple of things. I had hoped to ask at least one more question. There was on funding, and I don't think we should go into that, but we will definitely get to all the questions and share the answers with all the participants. We would write it up and share it as a document. And both IATP and CIDSE, I would really love to thank all our panelists and presenters, and thank you for attending today. We have recorded the webinar and we'll send out a follow-up email in the next few days with a link to the recording and the answers to the questions. Thank you so much.